I was never a man who believed in ghosts, you know? I was always the kind who trusted a V8 engine, grease on my elbows, and the smell of gasoline. To me, life's mysteries were in mechanics, parts fitting together, not in spirits or hauntings. But then Route 66 got me. And Route 66, my friends, is made of mysteries that not even the best wrench can solve. My name is Jack. Or it was, before I inherited what my father used to call the last paradise. A rundown gas station with a diner attached, sitting in the middle of nowhere, on the most forgotten stretch of Route 66, near the Arizona border. When my father died, he left me the place along with a mountain of debt. But more than anything else, he left me the sign. The sign. It was a bizarre work of art, a giant structure of iron and glass that had dominated the horizon for 70 years. A cowboy with his arms wide open, a hat tilted as if it were about to fly off in the next desert gust. By day, it was nothing but rusted scrap, a metal skeleton baking under the sun. But at night, when it lit up, that was another story entirely. My father warned me, of course. He always said, "Jack, take care of the neon. It's the heart of this place. But never, never, try to fix what's already dead inside it." I didn't understand. Neon is just light, right? Gas and electricity. If it breaks, you replace the transformer, clean the tube, and that's it. But the last paradise sign wasn't ordinary. It had colors you never saw anywhere else. The red was deep, almost like dried blood. The yellow was too bright, as if it might burst at any second. And then there was the green. The green was the worst. A sickly shade, part moss, part bone, that flickered in the cowboy's left eye. When I arrived to take over the business, most of the sign was dead. Only the outline of the hat and part of a boot still worked, blinking irregularly like the tired heart of an old man. Everything else was darkness, and the promise of work. I needed that sign working. On Route 66, if you don't have neon, you don't exist. It's the beacon that pulls travelers out of total darkness. So I ignored my father's warning and decided to become the electrician he never was. Joe, the old mechanic from the tiny nearby settlement, barely 10 houses in total, and the only living neighbor within 50 miles, saw me dragging out the ladders. He stopped his pickup, a Ford F-100 older than he was, and shuffled toward me. "What do you think you're doing, kid?" His voice was rough, like coarse sand. "I'm bringing this beauty back to life, Joe. Truckers need to see us again." Joe spat into the dusty ground. The sound was sharp and final. He looked at me with those deep blue eyes that seemed to have seen every mile of Route 66. "The neon isn't asleep, Jack," he said. "It's waiting." I laughed, trying to sound relaxed. "Waiting for what?" "An electrician." "Waiting to be fed," he replied, dead serious. "Your father knew that. That sign was built by Dr. Silas back in the 40s. They say Silas wasn't just an electrician. He was obsessed with light. He believed neon was the only artificial thing with a soul, because it came from the fire of noble gases pulled straight out of the earth. I had heard that legend about Silas before. The guy was a lunatic, vanished without a trace after finishing the sign. Just a story, Joe. What I need is voltage, not folklore. "It's not a story. It's a curse," Joe insisted, lowering his voice even though we were alone in the desert. "Silas did more than connect wires. He made a promise. He swore the sign would never go dark, even if Route 66 itself died. And to keep that promise, he had to pay a price. The price was energy, not the electrical kind. The other kind." I shook my head and climbed the ladder, ignoring the chill crawling up my spine. The sun was blazing, and I had work to do. I spent 3 days up there, surrounded by exposed wires, crumbling insulation, and wasp nests. I replaced transformers, cleaned mercury tubes, and reconnected cables that had been loose for decades. The cowboy's metal frame seemed to groan beneath my boots. By the end of the 3rd day, I was exhausted, covered in dust, hands sliced and raw. I climbed down, walked into the office, stood in front of the main breaker, and took a deep breath. The click of the switch was followed by a low hum, a deep bzz that didn't feel like it came from electricity alone, but from somewhere deep underground. And then it lit up. Not all of it, of course. but enough to be both glorious and terrifying. The hat glowed sky blue. The cowboy's body, rewired with extra care, burned in a vivid, almost aggressive red. And the left eye, the one Joe called the sick eye, flickered to life in that mossy green. The light was so intense that even in broad daylight it seemed to drain the sun of its brightness. I stood there, frozen, feeling the vibration through the ground. It was working. I'd done it. That's it, Dad. Paradise is shining again, I muttered, feeling a foolish swell of pride. The pride didn't last long. That night, I was asleep in the small back room, the only place with a working air conditioner, when the noise woke me. It wasn't the neon. I was already used to that hum. It was the sound of an engine. A big engine. An old V8, idling low, powerful enough to make the window tremble. I got up and went to the door. I looked out at the road. Nothing. Route 66 was dark and empty, just like always. Only the sign stood there, ruling the night with its insane glow. Must be a truck passing far off, I thought. But the sound wasn't distant. It felt like it was parked right in front of the gas pumps. I strained my eyes into the darkness, looking for headlights. Nothing. Just the neon light washing the forecourt in red and blue. I moved to the diner window that overlooked the lot. The smell of burnt oil and old gasoline, scents I knew by heart, rose into the air. And then I saw it. Not a car. Not exactly. I saw the reflection. The cracked, filthy concrete was reflecting the neon in a way that only happens when something large and polished is standing there. The reflection of a long vehicle, wide fenders. Maybe a muscle car from the 60s. The image was perfect, warped only by the fractures in the pavement. But when I looked up to where the car should have been, there was nothing. Just shimmering heat, drifting dust, and the intense green glow of the cowboy's eye. The engine revved again. Louder this time, a sharp burst of acceleration, and my stomach dropped. I was alone in the middle of the desert, staring at the reflection of a car that didn't exist. The reflection vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, along with the engine noise. All that remained was the heavy silence of the Arizona night. I went back to bed, shaking, trying to convince myself it had been a dream, that exhaustion and heat had conjured a mirage. But when I glanced out the window, the sign was different. The mossy green eye was pulsing now, flashing in a frantic rhythm, almost excited. The other neon tubes looked stronger, brighter, more alive. It felt like the light had fed on something. The next day, Joe came back. He didn't need to ask anything. He just looked at the sign, then at me, my face probably pale as chalk. "It liked what you did, Jack." "I didn't see anything, Joe. It was just a bad dream." "Don't lie to yourself, kid. You smelled it. You heard the engine." Silas built that sign to be a beacon, sure, but a beacon that attracts what Route 66 has already swallowed. I asked him to explain. I sat him down in the diner, poured him a strong black coffee, and told him I wanted the whole story, no folklore. Joe wrapped his wrinkled hands around the mug and began. Silas was a mad genius. He believed Route 66 wasn't just asphalt. It was a river of memory. Every car that broke down out there, every person who vanished, every accident, each one left a piece of its energy behind. When he built the sign, he used special neon tubes, mixed with minerals he pulled from abandoned mines around here. And he made a connection. A connection that didn't just draw power from the electrical grid. It fed on the energy of Route 66 itself. And what does that have to do with the ghost car? Everything. When you turn the sign on, especially the green one, the tube Silas wired differently, you're not lighting the road. You're pulling the road toward this place. You're calling the echoes. The things that were lost. The cars that vanished, the people who evaporated, the memories crushed into the pavement. They're drawn to the strongest light they remember. Then he told me about the first victim of the light. It wasn't a traveler. It was Silas's assistant, a young man named Jimmy who helped install the final tubes. Jimmy was young, full of life. He was standing under the sign, adjusting the transformer in the cowboy's arm. Silas flipped the power on for the first time. The sign lit up brighter than anything they'd ever seen. And when Silas looked again, Jimmy was gone. No body. No blood. No footprints. Just his pliers on the ground, and the sharp smell of ozone and mercury in the air. According to Joe, that's when Silas finally snapped. He realized the sign wasn't a beacon, it was a trap. And he ran, leaving the curse behind. Your father did his best to keep it dark. He only powered the bare minimum, just enough not to scare travelers away. But now you've turned it back on Jack. And the sign is hungry. My stomach tightened. The pride I'd felt fixing the sign had curdled into pure dread. I hadn't just repaired a landmark, I'd switched on a magnet for something unnatural. What do I do, Joe? I cut the main breaker. I tear the sign down. Joe shook his head slowly. Too late. That sign is like a well. You can put the lid back on, but whatever it's already pulled close, it doesn't just leave. You have to understand what it wants. What did it want? More energy? More souls? That afternoon, I couldn't focus on engines. I spent hours staring at the sign under the brutal sun, trying to read the iron skeleton. I still saw the cowboy, but now I saw something else, too. Silas's reflection, a madman trying to build a bridge between the highway and whatever lay beyond it. I needed to find something Silas had left behind. A manual. A diagram. Anything that explained how he'd done this. My father's office was a graveyard of junk, dusty boxes, engine manuals from the 50s, faded pin-up calendars. I tore through everything. I was almost ready to give up when I remembered Joe mentioning that Silas had wired the green tube differently. The main control panel was behind the diner counter, a gray metal beast that looked like it belonged in a submarine. I grabbed a screwdriver and started opening it up. Inside were cobwebs and the stale smell of dead electricity. The wiring was a nightmare, a snarl of old and newer cables my father had patched together over the years. But deep inside, taped to the back of the panel door and hidden beneath layers of insulation, was a brown paper envelope, old and yellowed. I pulled it free. It was sealed with a strange, dark wax that smelled faintly of copper. I tore it open. Inside was a map. Not a map of Route 66. It was a hand-drawn electrical schematic, painstakingly detailed, covered in notes written in frantic handwriting. There was no doubt about it. This was the original blueprint of the sign. But what made my blood run cold wasn't the wiring. It was the symbols. Alongside voltage diagrams and transformer markings were symbols that looked ripped from a very old book, circles, triangles, and wavy lines drawn in red ink. They connected the sign's power points to specific spots in the building's foundation. And at the very center of the diagram, where the moss-green wire of the cowboy's eye connected, there was a single word scrawled in large, trembling letters. Sacrifice. At that moment, the hum of the sign outside changed. It was no longer the steady bzzz. It became a pulsing sound, like mechanical breathing. And the moss-green light, which I could see through the small crack in the window, blinked 3 times. Slow, heavy, calling. I was no longer dealing with a broken sign. I was dealing with a machine, and that machine had a dark purpose written in red ink. I had to understand what Silas had done, and fast. Because if the sign was asking for sacrifice, I had the terrible feeling that I was next on the list of offerings. And night was only beginning to fall over Route 66. The smell of gasoline and ozone was coming back, faint at first, but growing stronger with every pulse of the green light. Something was returning to the road. And this time, it was heading straight for paradise. I swear to you, my friends, I had never felt fear that cold in my life. It wasn't the fear of being robbed or seeing some cheap ghost. It was the fear of being consumed, of being turned into raw energy to feed an engine that didn't need fuel. The green light pulsed again, and this time it was so strong it made the monitor at the front desk crack loudly. I threw myself behind the counter, as if a wooden desk could protect me from a neon specter. Silas, I whispered, my mouth dry. Silas, the mechanic who made a pact with the road, was coming back to collect a debt I didn't even know I'd signed. My hands shaking, I grabbed the phone and tried to call Mary, the police, anyone who wasn't trapped here with me. Nothing. The phone was dead. Not even a busy signal, just absolute silence, as if the line had been sliced clean by some massive electric blade. I looked at the power panel. The motel lights, what few were still on, began to flicker in a syncopated rhythm, matching the pulse of the green light outside. Thump, 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 like a mechanical heart beating in the darkness of Route 66. I had to do something, but what? Abandon the motel? And the guests? I had Mrs. Ellen and Mr. Martin in room 7, and a truck driver sleeping hard in room 22. I couldn't leave them to be fed to a curse. I stood up slowly, grabbed the old baseball bat I kept under the counter, more for scaring off coyotes than fighting electric ghosts, but it was all I had, and went to the window. What I saw made my stomach twist. It wasn't just the neon that was green. There was a car. It was parked right in the middle of the lot, directly beneath the Paradise sign. An old beast, a 1950s hot rod, the kind that looked like it had been designed to break the sound barrier. But it wasn't parked. It was pulsing. The chrome reflected the green light in a way that made the metal itself look alive, vibrating. There was no one in the driver's seat. No engine running, at least not a normal one. What I heard was a deep electrical hum, like an overloaded transformer, mixed with the ozone smell that now burned my nose. That was Silas's car. The car he'd built with help from the road. The car he used to carry souls. He had come back for the next replacement part. And I was at the top of the list. The car moved. It didn't start. It didn't shift gears. It simply lifted a few inches off the ground and began to glide across the asphalt. No tire noise, just that electric hum. It was patrolling. I had to warn the guests. I had to move fast. I left the front desk, crouch running through the dark hallways. The carpet was cold under my feet. I reached room 7, where Mrs. Ellen and Mr. Martin were staying, and pounded on the door. Mrs. Ellen. Mr. Martin. Wake up. This is an emergency. There's a serious power problem. You need to get out now. No answer. I knocked again harder. It's me, the owner. Please, open the door. The silence was thick. A chill ran up my neck. I glanced down the hallway and saw the green reflection of the car slide past a window. My hands shaking so badly I almost dropped them, I pulled out the master key and forced it into the lock. I turned it. The door creaked open. The room was empty. The bed was unmade. Mr. Martin's pajamas lay on the floor. But there was no sign of either of them. They hadn't left normally. The door had been locked from the inside when I arrived. And worse than that, the television was on. Not a program, just static. White noise glowing with a sickly green light, bathing the room in a ghostly haze. They were gone. Or worse, they had been taken. Panic hit me like a blow. I couldn't think about saving them anymore. I had to understand what was happening. Silas was using the motel as a nest, and the center of it all was that neon sign. I ran back to the front desk. I needed answers about Silas and Paradise. Old Silas hadn't been the first owner, the motel was older than him, but he'd been the last before me. And he was the point of origin, the heart of the curse. I remembered the rumors. Silas had been obsessed with speed and with keeping the motel lit, no matter the cost. I yanked open the bottom drawer of the counter, where I kept the property's old documents. Nothing. But then I remembered a story the former real estate agent had told me, a joke that didn't feel funny anymore. He'd said Silas had left his heart in the office. I started searching frantically. I knocked along the baseboards, pressed on the floorboards. And then I felt it. One plank was loose, right beneath where the dead phone sat. Using the tip of the baseball bat, I pried the board up. There was a dark cavity, and inside it, a book. Not a ledger. A black-covered book, worn, its edges scorched as if it had been struck by lightning. Silas's book. I opened it, and the smell of ozone intensified, nearly unbearable. The pages were yellowed, and the markings weren't handwritten, they looked etched. As if electric current itself had burned the words into the paper. Names. An endless list of names. Tourists. Truckers. Families. Beside each name, a date. And beside each date, a symbol that looked like a lightning bolt. I was staring at Silas's ledger of victims. A record of the souls he'd traded for speed and for the power to keep his neon blazing forever along Route 66. And at the bottom of the final page, in letters that seemed to glow faintly even in the dark, were the words, "The Keeper of the Light." And beneath it, the date was tonight. The curse was at its peak, and I was the final entry. Silas wasn't just hunting random souls. He was hunting the caretaker, the one who kept his beacon, paradise, alive. The book slipped from my hands. I heard the engine. Not the hum. This was a sharp, rising roar. The scream of burning rubber and shrieking metal. Silas's car wasn't patrolling anymore. It was accelerating. I ran back to the window. The green hot rod was spinning tight circles in the parking lot, but in a way no car should have been able to. It moved faster than physics allowed, and with every rotation it left no tire marks, only trails of glowing green light etched into the asphalt, as if it were drawing an invocation circle. And the car was aiming at the highest point of the motel. The neon sign. I understood instantly. The sign was the anchor. The curse needed electricity, needed that light, to fully manifest. If I killed the power, I might weaken it. There was no time to think. I dropped the bat and grabbed the master key. I had to reach the main breaker for the sign, mounted on the side of the building, halfway up a rusted maintenance ladder. I burst out of the front door and into the night. The air was heavy, almost liquid with the smell of electricity and hot metal. The car saw me. The moment my foot hit the asphalt, the phantom engine roared louder. The hot rod abandoned its circles and came straight for me, far too fast to be real. The wheels weren't spinning on the ground. They were spinning in the air, held up by the force of the pact itself. I ran for the ladder. My lungs burned. I could feel the heat of raw electricity at my back. I climbed, the metal rungs shrieking under my weight. I looked down. The car was right there, tearing up the grass. If I fell, it would take me. "Get out of here, Silas. Go!" I shouted, not knowing if he could even hear me. The car answered. It surged forward and slammed into the base of the ladder with a boom that wasn't metal on metal. It was pure energy discharging. The ladder shook violently. I nearly lost my grip. I clung to the top rail and hauled myself onto the platform where the neon breaker box was mounted. The box was old, rusted, and screaming. The noise was deafening, like thousands of electric insects trapped inside. The green light of the sign was flashing wildly, thump 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 thump, like a heart in cardiac arrest. I ripped the box open. Exposed wires. Cracked insulation. And in the center, a massive main breaker, ancient, easily 50 years old. I looked down. Silas's car was lining up for another charge. I had seconds. I closed my eyes, filled my lungs with the sharp bite of ozone, and grabbed the breaker with both hands. I pulled. It wasn't a click. It was a scream. A guttural, electrical shriek that seemed to come from inside the sign itself. The instant the breaker dropped, the green light died. Not just the sign, the color. It was as if green had been drained from the world. Darkness fell heavy and absolute, like a velvet shroud. The electrical hum stopped cold. The ozone smell vanished. And the hot rod. The car froze mid-charge. It didn't break. It simply lost cohesion. The green glow evaporated, the chrome dulled, and with a silent sigh, it collapsed. No explosion, no crash, just fell apart like a massive, lifeless puppet. Silence. The kind that hurts your ears. I stayed there on the ladder, gasping, waiting for thunder, a scream, anything. But there was only the night wind and my heart pounding like a drum. I'd won. For now. I climbed down slowly, staring at the heap of dead metal on the lawn. Just junk now. A terrifying reminder of what it had been moments earlier. Back inside, I swept the lobby with my flashlight. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with a dangerous surge of adrenaline. I picked up Silas's book again and turned to the last page. The Keeper of the Light. I wasn't just the next target. I was the key. Silas needed me to keep the curse alive, to keep the light burning on Route 66. Paradise wasn't just a motel. It was a lighthouse for death. Killing the breaker had only been a bandage. At any moment, if power returned, if engines turned over at sunrise, Silas could come back at full strength. I had to destroy the source, the heart of the curse. Where had Silas made the pact? Where had he concentrated that much energy to trade for souls? Then I remembered the old records. Paradise had always had a strange power setup. Before the modern grid, there was an abandoned shed out back, near the barbed wire fence. an old fuel pumping station with its own generator. Silas had insisted on keeping it active long after the main power lines were installed. No one had used that shed in decades. Just rust and debris. But if Silas had become electricity, if he'd merged with the system, then the place where the power was rawest, most isolated, had to be there. I looked out into the total darkness. Without the neon, Route 66 seemed to swallow the motel whole. I couldn't wait for morning. I grabbed my strongest flashlight, stuffed Silas's book into my backpack. It felt like proof, or maybe a map, and took the biggest screwdriver from the toolbox. Not a weapon, but it was metal. Maybe enough to break something electrical. "I'm ending this, Silas," I said to the empty air. My voice came out hoarse. I stepped outside. The screwdriver was cold in my hand. I knew I was heading toward the most dangerous place on the property, the heart of paradise. I was about to enter absolute darkness, where silence was only the promise of another roar. The neon curse was waiting, and Route 66 was calling me in for the final reckoning. The ground began to vibrate. Not an earthquake, pure electricity, pulsing beneath my feet. The basement of the old Roadhouse Zero wasn't just a basement. It was a control chamber. The diseased heart of the neon curse. When I forced open the rusted metal door, a wave of light slammed into me so hard I had to shield my face. It was like stepping into the sun, except this was a cold, electric, malicious sun. The air was saturated with ozone and burnt metal. At the center stood no altar. There was a machine made of light. A massive tangle of neon tubes, all feeding into an ancient control panel the size of a small car, humming and crackling like it was in pain. But the centerpiece, the thing that froze my blood, was the shape it formed. A stylized human figure, built of blood red and ice blue neon, shaped like a falling star that never hit the ground. And inside it I could see it. Not reflection. Energy. The stolen essence of every soul trapped along Route 66. The light wasn't just shining. It was feeding. "You came to see the masterpiece, didn't you?" The voice came from nowhere, and everywhere. Not human. Electricity modulated into sound, like a radio tuned wrong. I stepped back, heat rolling off the monstrous structure. "Silas?" I asked, a metallic taste flooding my mouth. Silas was the vessel. "I am the light. The eternal light." The red neon flickered wildly, almost laughing. He wanted his art to live forever. And it does. And I need fuel. And the most beautiful fuel of all is memory, the dream, the life that slowly fades away. I felt a pull, like an invisible magnet trying to tear my thoughts out of my skull. My vision blurred. The neon colors grew sharper, brighter, painfully alive. "You won't take me," I said, squeezing my eyes shut. I had to be fast. The journal said the bond was energy, the constant connection. "Oh, but I already have. You're here, mesmerized, absorbing my beauty. You'll be my final masterpiece, the missing flourish Route 66 deserves. You've traveled so far, seen so much, such wasted energy." The floor began to glow around me. Thin neon filaments I hadn't noticed before crawled up the walls, forming a cage of light. I was trapped. The entity, spirit, machine, whatever it was, intensified the assault. The light burned brighter, searing even through my eyelids. I collapsed to my knees, groaning. It felt like the light was cooking me from the inside. My strength drained away, and even my own name felt distant, like a word on the tip of my tongue. Focus. Focus. The journal mentioned a flaw. A need for grounding. The light needed life, but it hated what was natural and mortal. I scanned the room, searching for the main distribution panel, the master switch Silas had scribbled about in his manic notes as the heart of zero. It was behind the main neon structure, shielded by a curtain of blue tubes humming with thousands of volts. "Don't try, traveler. It's useless. I am the way. I am the light." The electric voice boomed, distorted and overwhelming. I dragged myself forward, using the last scraps of strength I had. Every inch I crawled felt like it drained a year from my life. My skin prickled. My hair stood on end. The energy was rejecting me and craving me at the same time. I reached the wall of blue tubes. They were thick and hot. Touching them would fry me instantly. I needed something to break them, something to cut through. Then I remembered the lug wrench I'd grabbed from my car earlier, thinking I might need it if I ran into some deranged local. It was still tucked into the back pocket of my jeans. With shaking hands, I pulled out the cold iron. "What are you going to do? Destroy my art? You barbarian!" The neon screamed, rising into a shrill whine that stabbed my ears. I raised the wrench. The light was so intense it looked like the metal was melting in my grip. I had one chance. One swing. I had to hit the panel, the heart. With a roar that came from my soul, not my throat, I lunged forward, ignoring the blinding agony as the light wrapped around me. I aimed for the densest point of the blue tube barrier, where the energy was thickest. The sound was deafening. Glass exploded. Electricity screamed. A massive arc of power leapt from the machine, and I was thrown backward, slamming into the concrete wall. I smelled my own hair burning. For a moment, everything went white. I thought I was dead. Then the white faded into a flickering, unstable red. I'd broken the barrier, but not the heart. The control panel was exposed now, an ancient fuse box with a massive, rusted lever. The body of Zero. I staggered to my feet. Every muscle screamed, but the neon's pain had lessened, replaced by a cold, focused rage. The neon entity was furious. The towering human-shaped figure of light at the center of the room flickered erratically, like a dying heart. "You can't turn me off. I am the memory of the road. I am the light that guards the way." The voice cracked, desperate. I knew if I hesitated, it would recover. I ran for the panel. The lever was jammed, stiff, as if it hadn't moved in half a century. I grabbed it with both hands. The metal burned my palms, but I clenched my teeth and pulled. The neon made one final, horrific effort. Red light condensed and fired toward me like a focused bolt. It slammed into my chest, agony exploding through my body. The curse was trying to absorb me all at once, turning me into instant fuel. "I'll take you with me." But I was stubborn. I'd seen what that light did to people. I'd felt the cold of that place. With everything I had left, I pulled. Clank. The loudest, most final sound I've ever heard. The sound of a cut. The sound of an ending. And then, silence. Darkness. Not the darkness of a room with the lights off. A total, dense darkness that swallowed everything. The electrical hum vanished. The ozone smell disappeared. The infernal heat was replaced by a sudden, gentle coolness. I collapsed onto the concrete floor, gasping, coughing, smelling dust and rust instead of electricity. I lay there in the dark for a long time, waiting for the neon to flicker back to life, waiting for the entity to strike again. Nothing came. The darkness held. The curse was broken. Then something happened that made me cry, not from pain, but from relief. I felt a breeze. A soft, cool breeze that came from nowhere. It brushed past me gently, like a collective sigh. The souls trapped in the light for decades were free. I could feel the lightness of it, the quiet gratitude. It was as if a massive weight had been lifted from the land. I forced myself up and felt my way through the dark. I had to get out before someone came to investigate the blackout, or before the whole place collapsed on top of me. I found the metal door and pushed it open. I staggered up the stairs, through the upstairs kitchen. Everything was dead. Fryers, counters, tables, everything looked abandoned now, stripped of the false life the neon had given it. I reached the front door and opened it. Cool dawn air washed over me. I was back on Route 66. I turned to look at the old Roadhouse Zero. Now it was just an ugly, cracked concrete building under pale moonlight. No malicious glow. No inviting hum. The Zero sign was dark, a twisted metal skeleton. I turned toward the road. And that's when I got my final confirmation. I started walking east along Route 66. Slowly, the sun broke over the horizon. As natural light spread, I looked around. Motels, abandoned gas stations, roadside diners. Every neon sign that once had that sickly glow, that pulsing light that seemed to drain hope, was dark. The Vegas Star Motel was silent. At Devil's Diner was nothing but rust. The curse hadn't been limited to Roadhouse Zero. It had been spread through the electrical veins of that stretch of highway, and I'd cut its heart out. I walked for hours, feeling the sun on my back. Real warmth. Honest warmth. Not the false heat of neon gas. My body was wrecked, bruised, lightly burned, but my mind was clear. When I finally found a gas station that was open and alive, lit by plain white fluorescent lights, the boring but safe kind, I stopped. The clerk, an old man who looked like he'd seen everything, sized me up. I was filthy. "Looks like you had one hell of a night," he said calmly as I grabbed a bottle of ice-cold water. I smiled. A tired smile. A long one. And a dark one. I got into my car. I needed to leave that area, keep moving. But before I started the engine, I paused and looked in the rearview mirror, thinking about everything. The fear, the darkness, the fight against the light. I learned something deep on that forgotten stretch of Route 66. Darkness isn't always the enemy. Sometimes, darkness is what's left when you finally turn off the wrong light. Darkness can be refuge, the one place a curse can't reach. I started the engine and drove on, leaving Roadhouse Zero behind as a silent ruin under the desert sun. I still travel Route 66, that I still stop at roadside motels, that I still drink coffee in old diners. And I still see neon. But now, when I see a neon sign, I don't just see art or advertising. I see energy. I see potential. And if I ever see a light that flickers the wrong way, one that seems to drain color from the world around it, I turn around. I don't stop anymore. Because Route 66 is a road of dreams and dust, but it's also a road of sacrifice. And I know that somewhere, deep in America, Silas's ghost is still wandering, looking for a new power source, waiting for someone to flip the master switch again. But for now, darkness won. And Route 66 can finally rest. So can I. And that's why I always say this, my friends. Be wary of anything that shines too brightly. Sometimes the most beautiful light is the one that hurts the most. Thanks for listening to my story, and take care on the road, boys.